for A&P, but further down the hall. 45 multiple choice questions and then 5 fill in the blanks. The chapters that are included are the joints chapter, muscle tissue, and muscular system. So one less chapter than on the previous exam. So hopefully that's a little bit more approachable. And there is one more thing you'll need to do by Friday for the disease presentation video. It'll take you probably 5 minutes. It's just a peer evaluation form that's on Canvas. So some people have already turned it in. I originally had it set due on last Friday, but since you guys weren't in class and I totally forgot about it, I just extended it a week. So it just asks you to rank yourself kind of how you did on 5 different aspects as far as group work goes, and then rank each of your group members as well. So did they submit work on time? Did they submit quality work? That kind of stuff. Just really general, just to kind of give me an idea of how everyone worked together. So that is due by Friday. You'll just download the document and then fill it out and re-upload it to Canvas. And I think that's it. Okay, so nervous tissue, oops, is our next chapter here. I'm sure you guys can see there. Okay, nervous tissue has kind of a lot in how it functions, a lot in common with muscle tissue, which is kind of nice. So if you understand muscle tissue, and hopefully you will by the time the test comes around on Wednesday, you'll understand a lot about nervous tissue as well. So basically the rest of this semester, we'll be talking about the nervous system. I can't believe we're almost kind of to the end of the semester. I feel like it was just midterm, but we're wrapping up the systems that we talk about in A&P1 with the nervous system. It is complex, so we'll be spending the rest of the semester on it in one form or another. Starting off with, again, just kind of the tissue type, like we've done with the skeletal system and the muscular system. We talk about the tissue first and then get into sort of how all that tissue, the tissue aspects work together. Okay, so nervous system is complex, and a lot of it's sort of intangible. You can move your arm and understand how a muscle works, or you understand how bones kind of fit together, but the nervous system has a lot to do with our personality, our behavior, some kind of a memory, less tangible aspects of ourselves, but obviously really, really important aspects of ourselves as humans. We won't talk about the endocrine system in detail. That'll be covered in the second semester, A&P2, if you go on to that. But the endocrine and the nervous systems do work really closely together. So the endocrine system, if you remember back to when you learned the 11 organ systems way back at the beginning of the semester, has a lot to do with the release of hormones. Hormones are just chemical messengers that tell different parts of your body to do different things, to release things or move things along. So the endocrine system will release hormones. The hormones will often affect the nervous system, but the nervous system's role in all of this and the internal coordination aspect of our bodies is to use electrical and chemical signals to send, or electrical and chemical impulses basically, to send signals around the body. So the nervous system sends messages to muscles, to glands, to organs, etc. Okay, so you'll hear me talk about some hormones throughout this, well, for the rest of the semester. Most of them are going to come from the endocrine system. There are some chemicals that come specifically from the nervous system as well. I'm going to spend a little bit of time here talking about how the nervous system is organized. Like I said, it's complex. So this is one of those systems where there's a lot of divisions and subdivisions and subdivisions sometimes. And I'm going to walk you through those aspects of it, kind of the organization of it. right now. And at the end of all these slides where I'm talking about kind of subdivisions, there's a really nice flow chart that hopefully helps simplify it a little bit versus having it in bullet points on different slides. So first off, the two major divisions, big picture, are the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system, the CNS and the PNS. Central nervous system is really simple in the sense that it doesn't have a lot of subdivisions. It's the brain and the spinal cord. That's pretty much it. Obviously, there's a lot dealing with the brain. We'll have almost a whole chapter talking about the brain. The peripheral nervous system is basically everything else. So all of the nerves that are coming off of really just the spinal cord. So all those nerves that branch off of the spinal cord, those are all going to be considered the peripheral nervous system. That's where it gets kind of complicated. So I really won't talk more in this organizational setup about the central nervous system. I'm going to focus on the peripheral and talk about the divisions and subdivisions within there. So the peripheral nervous system has both sensory and motor divisions. So the sensory division basically takes information in. The motor division is going to send information out. So the sensory division is also called the afferent division. Unfortunately, you'll see on the next slide, the motor division is called the efferent division. So A versus E, one letter change. But yeah, starting first with the sensory division, I'll probably use that term a lot more just because it makes a lot more sense to me, but afferent and efferent will come up in other ways. So you want to know those terms as well. The sensory division of the peripheral nervous system has both a somatic and a visceral division within it. So here's where we get into those divisions and subdivisions, getting a little bit complicated. Somatic just means signals from receptors in, say, the skin, muscles, bones, joints. That's where the somatic sensory division mainly resides. The visceral sensory division is your organs. So you don't really think about your organs receiving signals, but when your stomach's full, it sends a message to your brain. So it can sense that it's full, sends a message to the brain to say, don't eat anymore, or you shouldn't eat anymore. So the visceral sensory division carries signals from essentially your internal organs. When I say viscera, just think internal organs. Those signals are sent, as I mentioned, I think, to the central nervous system. So you'll see CNS and PNS a lot. Central nervous system is going to be CNS, peripheral, PNS. Okay, so that is the aspect of the nervous system that is sensing some kind of outside stimulus, or maybe inside stimulus if we're talking visceral, but it's sensing something and sending that message to the central nervous system. The motor or efferent division is taking signals from the central nervous system and sending them back out to tell your muscles or glands to do something, to release a hormone, or to move your finger away from a hot stove, something like that. The motor division also has the somatic and visceral division. So we divide it into the somatic, which would be mostly just skeletal muscles. So sending a message to, like I said, your finger maybe to pull it away from a hot plate or stove. Visceral motor division is going to send messages to your viscera, your internal organs and glands, as well as cardiac and smooth muscle will be your internal organs. Here we're going to get a little more complicated and go divide the visceral motor division into two other aspects. the sympathetic and parasympathetic aspects. Overall, the visceral motor division is known as the autonomic nervous system. Remember, I said autonomic is like automatic. You don't have to think about it. The actions are carried out sort of on their own. You don't have to think about when your heart beats, or if you need to increase your heart rate when you're exercising. Your body just does it on its own. All right, so within the motor division, within that aspect of the nervous system that is sending messages out to internal organs and glands, I want to talk a little bit really briefly right now about the sympathetic and parasympathetic parts of that. We'll get into a lot more detail in a future chapter on sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions. Okay. The main difference between the sympathetic division of the visceral motor division of the autonomic nervous system. Sympathetic is going to excite your body, raise your heart rate, raise your breathing, your respiration rate, and it gets your body ready for action. So sympathetic is excitatory, basically. It raises the stress level. Any hormones that are associated with stress, those go up if the sympathetic division is stimulated. The other side of that, the parasympathetic, is the nice calming side of the nervous system. So when the parasympathetic is enacted, your body calms down, your respiration rate, your heart rate goes down, stress hormones decrease. It's just nice and calm. So if you're in danger and running from a lion or something, your sympathetic division is going to be stimulated. Your parasympathetic will hopefully kick in once you've outrun the lion or climbed a tree and you're safe. We could probably stand to utilize our parasympathetic division a little bit more in today's day and age. And I'll talk about that aspect, just basically always being stressed and having high levels of cortisol and basically never letting your sympathetic division rest can cause some pretty major issues. So that's for a future down the road lecture. All right, so that's sympathetic and parasympathetic. We'll look at this division, this whole kind of organizational schema in this lovely diagram. These diagrams help me. For some reason, like I said, I'm visual and I like to see how things are organized. So if this is helpful for you, great. It just helps me kind of have a picture of how we divide these different aspects of the nervous system. So we have the central nervous system, brain and spinal cord, simple, right? Yay, central nervous system. It does a lot, but it doesn't have a whole lot of divisions. The peripheral nervous system is where we get into all of these kind of complicated subdivisions. The first division is sensory and motor. There are aspects of the peripheral nervous system that are taking in information, that's the sensory. And then the other half of it is sending signals out to, say, your skeletal muscles to move in a certain way. That's the motor division. Each of those break down into essentially the same two subdivisions. So the sensory division breaks down into the visceral and the somatic. So internal organs versus skeletal muscles. Motor division, same thing, visceral versus somatic. So for you guys here, visceral, somatic, under each of these initial divisions of the peripheral nervous system. And then one further division is where we break down the visceral motor division, which I've noted there is also called the autonomic nervous system. That'll come up again, that term will come up again. So I want to make sure you know we're talking specifically about this when we do the autonomic nervous system. You can break that down into the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. So the excitatory aspect is the sympathetic. The calming half of that is the parasympathetic. See, like I said at the beginning, the nervous system, it's complicated. But those are all the divisions that you'll need to know. And we'll kind of go through not each of these individually. I'll focus on some more than others, but we'll be talking about all of these different divisions throughout the next, what, month? Is there a month left of school? Something like that. Okay. There are three properties. I'm going to get into neurons now. So the main cell of the nervous system, a neuron. They have three properties. All of them have these properties. They can all be excited. They can all conduct electricity, just like muscle cells. And they can all potentially secrete or lead to secretion of chemicals. So the excitability is just that they can respond to stimuli from the outside. So that's when a neuron gets excited, it's responding to some kind of stimulus from outside the body or inside the body, but outside that organ. Conductivity, like I said, the neurons will send electrical signals, just like in muscle cells at action potential. Same idea. And when we get into that aspect of how neurons actually send information, I thankfully won't have to go into a ton of detail because by then you guys will have studied and know everything about the action potential in muscle cells. And it's the same exact idea in nerve cells. So electrical signals are being sent. That's how information is sent around your body through electricity, along with neurotransmitters, which are just chemicals that are released from these nerves to tell the next nerve what to do, or to tell a gland or a muscle what it should be doing. Okay, those are the three universal properties of neurons. We can also break neurons down into three functional classes. Two of these hopefully already look kind of familiar to you. This is just what neurons do. There's three different kinds of neurons based on what they do. There's the sensory or afferent neurons. They're taking in information from the outside. So if you prick your finger and you notice it, that's the sensory aspect. The sensory neurons are taking in that information that you have some kind of prick in your finger. That information gets sent to what are called interneurons. These are all within the central nervous system. So the sensory neurons are in the peripheral nervous system, right? That's all the nerves outside of the central nervous system. That information gets sent to the central nervous system, specifically to what we call interneurons. Those are the decision-making neurons. So your central nervous system is what's making all the decisions. Most of your neurons are interneurons because it takes a lot of energy and power to actually make all of those decisions. The interneurons will make a decision. They then send out a message to the motor or efferent neurons to say, okay, take your finger away from whatever is pricking it. If it's a cactus, move your finger away. So that's the motor or efferent neuron side of the equation. So in a very simple sense, that's how the nervous system works. Takes in information, makes a decision, sends information out to tell your body what to do based on that stimulus. The anatomy of a neuron. We've talked about this before. I don't think I've really talked about the axons and the dendrites. I've just said there's all these branches coming off of neurons. So we're going to talk about those in this chapter in more detail. If you think of a neuron, it has this main area where the nucleus is found. So this kind of big globular area. That is called, let me minimize this. Go. This is called the neurosoma, or the neuron cell body. Wherever the nucleus is found, that kind of big blob in the middle, That's the main part of the cell. The cell body, the neurosoma, multiple different names. And on the next slide, I'll talk about the axons versus the dendrites. Those are the branches that are coming off. But it is really important to note that neurons are amitotic. That means they don't divide. They don't make any more of themselves. After fetal development, you don't make any new neurons. So you want to protect your neurons as much as possible. That's why damage to the nervous system can have essentially irreversible effects a lot of times. I'll talk about some ways in which the nervous system and neural connections can repair themselves, but it's not always perfect, it's not always possible, and it's usually pretty slow because you can't make any new neurons. So the neurons you have are your neurons for life. However you can protect them, protect them. The axons and the dendrites. The dendrites are the branches that are coming off. So there's multiple dendrites for one neuron. There's only one axon per neuron. Over here, you have these multiple dendrites coming off. And then this is the one axon, this one long piece here. So these are dendrites for you guys on Zoom. And then one axon. Dendrites are receiving signals from other neurons. So they're taking in information that's being sent to them from other neurons, putting it into the cell body, and then going from there. The axon is sending information out. So axon away, I guess that's maybe one of the best ways to remember that. Axon sends information away from the cell body. Dendrites are taking external information in. The axon is also called the nerve fiber. And the myelin sheath that's noted here, I'll talk about that in detail. Not today, I'll get to it Friday probably. But this myelin sheath is a really important aspect of the axon. Yeah, so here's some cool images of a neuron actually in a tissue. So here's the overall kind of, you can see the branching. And then in each of these other three, the soma, the neurosoma, the dendrites, and the axon are highlighted in this kind of aqua color. So here you have the main cell body, not that big, lots of dendrites. So all of those are taking information in from other neurons. And then here's the one axon going out from the neurosoma to send information to another neuron. And then we also have all those little tiny cells, if you remember, that are kind of dotted around the neurons, the neuroglia. I talked about these in lab briefly, and I think I talked about them when we did the histology chapter. You have the main neurons, those are the big cells, the really important ones. Then you have all those glial or neuroglia cells, which are all these little tiny dots around here. Those are just supportive cells. So they're helping to support the main neuron here. They insulate it, provide nutrition to it, help to transmit signals between neurons, etc. In total, there's about 1 trillion neurons in a person's nervous system. The glial cells outnumber those neurons by 10 to 1. So there's 10 trillion neuroglial cells in the nervous system. That's a lot of cells. So they are really important, even though they're tiny. I'll talk more about them on Friday. So yeah, we'll stop there for today. There's different kinds of glial cells, so I'll get into those on Friday. But now, in order, so I'm sure we have enough time to do the review. I want to stop here with nervous tissue. So done lecturing for today. Again, that info is not on the exam on Wednesday. Okay, while I'm getting the Kahoot set up, do you guys have any questions for me? Like what's on the exam or any specific material type questions?
I have a question.
Yep, hang on.
So for the planer and or like the flexion, extension, and everything like that, are you gonna give us an example like pushing a door open and then we have to tell you everything that's involved?
Not everything that's involved, it'll be simpler than that. So if I say like, you raise your arm out to the side, what is that called? So that would be abduction. So
Okay, so
it'll be
mostly,
simpler.
mostly it's just gonna be like one, not multiple.
Exactly, yes.
Okay.
Good question. Any other questions before we start this? I'll put this link up so you guys can come back to this and study it as well. My goal was to kind of run the gamut of all of the different topics we talked about. Obviously, there's only 18 questions, so I couldn't hit everything. But hopefully some of these are good reminders for, oh yeah, I need to go back and study, you know, the anatomy of a muscle cell or something like that. Can you guys on Zoom see that? I don't see a whole lot of people from Zoom. Maybe you're just not listening. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start. The pin should be at the bottom if you want to join after I get this started. So like I said, 18 questions. We should have just enough time to finish it. I don't talk for too long. Which type of joint contains a fluid-filled cavity? All right, synovial. A synovial joint is the only one with a cavity. Even if I just said cavity, synovial will be the right answer. There is fluid within the cavity. So you definitely want to know those main categories of joints. Synovial is what we spent most of the time on. What category of joints do skull sutures fall into? All right, that's a tougher one. Skull sutures are fibrous joints. So fibrous and cartilaginous are tough to keep separate. Fibrous are joined by cartilage. Sorry, I always do that. Collagen fibers. Cartilaginous are joined by cartilage. And you wouldn't naturally know that. So I gave you some examples of each of these. You definitely want to know skull sutures are fibrous joints. The bones are joined by the collagen fibers. So look at the examples that I gave you on the PowerPoint for the fibrous and the cartilaginous, in particular synovial. These are the three main categories of joints. Synovial we went into a ton of detail about, so Hopefully you know what the synovial joints are. A blank joint involves a bone spinning on its longitudinal axis. So longitudinal would be like that, kind of up and down, spinning around. A pivot joint. So a pivot joint is one that we didn't talk a ton about. We spent a lot of time on ball and socket joints and hinge joints. A pivot joint would be like the axis, the C2 vertebra. So when you can turn your head like this, that's pivoting. Your radio-ulnar joint is the same. When your radius turns around the ulna of your arm, when you supinate and pronate your arm. So pivot joints are ones we don't really think about a whole lot, but you want to know these different categories of synovial joints and know what kind of movements they make. A hinge joint would be like the elbow, so it only moves sort of in that one direction. A gliding or plane joint would be where the bones are just barely moving past each other, kind of on a flat surface, two flat surfaces. Okay, pronation of the hand results in the palm facing which way? Nice, awesome, down, yeah. So supination, it's like you're holding a bowl of soup. So your palm would be facing up. Pronation is just the opposite, your palm is facing down. Which joint is the most freely movable joint in the body? Oh yeah, so these are the fancy names for the joints, which you'll need to know. All right, glenohumeral, what joint is that? What's the common name? The shoulder, yeah. I put those up there because I definitely want you to know that the glenohumeral joint is the shoulder. It's where the humerus attaches to the glenoid cavity of the scapula. So you want to know the common name as well as the official, like I said, fancy name of the joints that I gave you. Some of them I didn't give you a fancy name, but for any that I did, you want to know them. So the glenohumeral joint, the shoulder joint, is the most freely movable joint in the entire body. What is a skeletal muscle cell called? All right, that's always a tough one. There's a lot of myo words, right? Myofiber is going to be the muscle cell. The myofilaments, does anyone know what that's referring to? Myofilament. Actin and myosin. Actin and myosin are the myofilaments. The myofibrils basically contain the myofilaments. So you definitely want to know the differences between all of those myo words. Myofiber is the muscle cell. All right, these are infoldings of the sarcolemma. So you have to know what the sarcolemma is. All right, T-tubules, that's another tough one. It's another muscle cell anatomy question. So who knows what the sarcolemma is? Anyone remember? It's the name of the plasma membrane of a muscle cell. So just the outer boundary of the cell, that's the sarcolemma. I don't know why it gets its own special name, but it does. It's just the plasma membrane. The T tubules are those infoldings, the tubes basically running down into the cell. So the sarcolemma actually folds in at those points. That's where the action potential runs down, causing the release of calcium. So you want to know all of those aspects, and all of these other terms on here you should know too. So that's a good way to test yourself. If you go back to this quiz, make sure you know what a sarcomere is, what the sarcoplasmic reticulum is. We talked about myofibrils already. All right, number 8. Which protein on a myofilament do calcium ions bind to? All right, troponin. That whole muscle contraction process, this is an important part of it. So troponin, do you guys remember what myofilament that's on, actin or myosin? Yep, it's on actin. So the troponin is on the actin. Once calcium binds to it, it shifts the tropomyosin off of the active sites of the actin. So troponin or troponin and tropomyosin are really easy to mix up. I would say go back and, well, you can look at the slides, obviously, that I have up, but also that crash course video that we watched. It was really fast and a lot of information. Slow it down. And there's some good graphics to kind of help you understand how calcium binds to the troponin, which will then move the tropomyosin, allowing for the cross bridge to be created. That whole process you want to know in detail. Okay. The charge inside of a resting muscle cell is what? Negative. Yeah, that was a tough one for the 8 a.m. class too. So inside a muscle cell when it's resting and a nerve cell. So same idea when they're resting. I know we haven't gotten to that in the nervous system yet, but it's a negative charge inside. That's essentially just potential energy waiting to be released. So that's how you can think of the negative charge inside of the muscle cell, the resting muscle cell. That changes when an action potential gets released, etc. But a resting muscle cell, when it's not doing anything, is negatively charged inside. At the very beginning of exercise, oxygen is supplied via what molecule? Myoglobin. That's a tough one. This is where I talked about, say, within the first few seconds of exercise, what happens, and then after 6 to 8 seconds, and then up to 40 seconds, I kind of went through that process of essentially how ATP is produced. That's what we were talking about, the aerobic versus anaerobic production of ATP. Myoglobin, hemoglobin was another good answer. So myoglobin is essentially hemoglobin for the muscles. It's carrying oxygen. It has oxygen attached to it. But within the first few seconds of exercise, you've essentially used up all of the oxygen on that myoglobin. So it doesn't provide oxygen for very long. Glycogen and glucose don't provide the oxygen. They provide the carbon. Okay. What type of fascicle orientation is shown below? All right, even if you had no idea, it's probably a good guess because it's a triangular shape, right? It's named based on, these fascicle orientations are named based on the shape. So this is kind of triangular, so that would be a triangular fascicle orientation. I mostly put this in here to just remind you, go back and look at those fascicle orientations and be able to pick out which one a diagram is showing, or if I kind of describe in words what the fascicle orientation is, be able to tell me what category that would fall into. So these other three are also different fascicle orientations. If your diaphragm is relaxed, your lungs are empty or full. I think that was the exact same split between in the 8 a.m. class. Half of the people got it right, half didn't. So this is a concept that's kind of hard to understand for a lot of students. So your diaphragm, if you think about your diaphragm below your, here, for you guys to see this, there. So your diaphragm is below your lungs, right? If it's domed up, it's relaxed. If it's flattened out, it's contracted. So if it's domed up, that's essentially pushing air out of your lungs. So your lungs are empty. When your lungs are full, it gets pushed down or it pulls itself down, it contracts, so it's flat and your lungs are full. So know those relationships between relaxation and contraction, whether it's domed or flat, and then if that what that means for your lungs being full or empty. That's an easy to confuse set of topics, I guess is the best way to say that. Which group of muscles is the letter A referring to? Sorry, this is tiny. That's the back of a person. So just basically all these muscles running down here. You guys on Zoom, all of these muscles running longitudinally. Yes, the erector spinae, nice. So if you know that's the back of a person, hopefully you know it's not the quadriceps femoris, and also that's in the leg. The abdominals are another good guess, but the abdominals are on the anterior side. So I'd be showing you the front of a person if I was asking about the abdominals. So the erector spinae is a group of 3 muscles. You want to know what those muscles are and know that they essentially keep your spine straight. So now I have a bunch of muscle questions, basically. What are these muscles? This is the front of a person in the chest area. Nice, pectoralis major. Those are your big chest muscles. Yeah, good job. What is this muscle? Okay, so that's the top side of the forearm into the hand. The extensor digitorum. So that's a tough one. Those forearm muscles are always tough. It's something digitorum because it goes into the fingers. So this muscle is actually going to extend the fingers upward because it's on the back side of the hand. So that would be extensor digitorum. Let's try to get through these last few. This muscle, this is the back of a person. So that red triangular thing. It would be on both sides, I should say that. This is just it's superficial. That is the trapezius. Good. A lot of other people put deltoid. People put deltoid in the 8 a.m. class too. So your deltoid is your shoulder, like the outer shoulder muscle. So if you lift your arm out to the side, that's your deltoid. The trapezius is a huge back muscle. Does a lot of different things, but that is the trapezius. Really big. All right, 2 more. Which muscle is found at the front of the lower leg? So I don't have an image, but just front of the lower leg. All right, tibialis anterior. This is where knowing those roots, those Latin roots, can kind of help out. Tibialis, tibia, so you know that's the lower leg. Anterior, front. Gastrocnemius is the back of the lower leg. Hamstring, back of the upper leg. Gluteus maximus is the butt muscle. Oh yeah, so there's 2 correct answers here, so select both of them. And this is kind of hard to see, I apologize. This is the back of the leg. So you have this big muscle here, and then the one running along the inside of the thigh. So big muscle, and then the one running along the inside of the thigh there. You guys on Zoom. So it is the gluteus maximus and the gracilis. Gluteus maximus is that the big butt muscle that provides a lot of power as you walk upstairs. The gracilis is this kind of thin, long muscle on the very inside, the medial side of the thigh that allows you to basically move your leg towards the midline of your body, so inward. All right, that is it. So yeah, I'll put this up as a link so you can look at those again. Good job, Jenna, number 3. Gabby, number 2, good job. All right, nice job, Jack. Okay, and I'll see you guys either in lab or on Wednesday for the exam.